welcome back. This is an episode technically of the Dissecting Medicine podcast, but not really, because I don't actually have another guest available for today. We're lining up a few more of them, but some of them are a little bit delayed. Some of them I have to work with schedules of some of the guests, and sometimes they're not available to actually do the recording till a few more weeks or months in advance. So I've hit, as I expected, to be honest, it's episode 4. I thought I would have hit this problem at episode 1. We've been able to get an episode out every fortnight. And if you're following my Thursday Thoughts emails, I mentioned in that one yesterday, although this is coming out on Sunday, but it's Friday right now, usually when I record these, that I haven't got a guest lined up. And I said there wouldn't really be an episode. But then what I decided was maybe a good idea is just to do one of these episodes where I just kind of ramble to the camera. And if you're listening on Spotify, I guess ramble to the microphone. About my own career, if you can call it that, and why I'm now making the decision to try to pursue a career in medicine, despite having tried to pursue it almost a decade ago now. So whether or not this is actually useful, I have no idea. Probably won't get the same amount of listens, which is fair. But if you were interested at all in hearing about my own career, that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about, is kind of what's led me to this position, what I've really spent the last 12 years of my working life doing as a tutor, and the kind of behind the scenes stuff. I don't normally talk much about that or what's kind of led me to this. I just kind of broadly refer to running a business, being a high school tutor, and now Gamsat Tutoring as well. So this will be kind of like a in-depth look at exactly kind of what I've been doing. It's not scripted. I try not to script these kind of things because I find them a bit more disingenuous, and I guess I'm just kind of spitballing how I would reflect on those 12 years, and what it is that's ultimately driving me towards now looking at kind of sadly changing that path as well. So first of all, if you're watching this and this is your first video, I guess I'll introduce myself as Jesse and say that I am just a medical school applicant, like many of you might be, and this podcast started because I really wanted to plan my own career in it. I wanted to learn more about the different specialties. And I also just wanted to be as aware as possible about all kinds of different elements of healthcare, which is why I try to interview people in research and academia, and hopefully some people in public policy and that kind of thing as well in the future. But I also wanted it to be something that shows that career itself, I think we romanticize the concept quite a bit, which is why I try not to really use the word too often. And I think people look at it as a very permanent thing, whereas I've kind of learnt that it's really not as permanent as we think. And for me at least, it's a very kind of transient concept. I kind of see things as, I guess, progressing kind of in decade intervals. I've kind of found like I'm a little over a decade now, and I'm starting to find I want to start pursuing something different. And truthfully, I expect that in another decade, things might change again, or it might be sooner, it might be later. I'm kind of one to believe that what people should do is just pursue what they're passionate about. And at the moment, this is exactly what I'm passionate about. So it's a big part of why I started this channel. I might also talk a little bit about why the channel started and what that entails as well further down the track. Hopefully this isn't too long a rambling video. But effectively to start off, so I started tutoring pretty much right out of high school. I originally worked at Woolworths, which if you're not in Australia is just like main grocery supermarket chain, and stopped getting shifts while I was in my first semester of uni, and realized I needed to make a change, get a different job. And I found an ad on the university kind of careers page where people could actually then just put up ads requesting people to work for them. And it might have been actual recruiting companies. It might have been, as I got, someone looking for a tutor for their son. And so I responded to that ad and said, yep, I'm in the area, I can do it. Truthfully, I actually had no idea what a tutor does. When I was going through high school, I could never afford a tutor, and tutors really weren't as common as they are now for high school students. But I knew that it was something that, having been self-taught, I was like, I think I've got the skills to be able to help here. And it was for year 10 maths, and I was like, okay, I'm very strong in my maths. I'm sure that I can help them in some way. And what I'm going to do is learn from the first session myself whether or not this is something that could actually be a job. And so I did that session, and immediately on that same night, I was already referred to like another family member and had a second student lined up. The feedback was really positive. The student got a huge amount out of it. I really enjoyed it. And I just kind of immediately learnt like, wow, this is a job. I didn't think of it as a career at that point, but I was at uni. So this was about 6 months into uni. It was in July of 2011. And I realized then and there, like, this could be my uni job. This could replace my work. And so I had already quit my job at that point, which was, looking back on it, kind of a crazy move, but whatever, I did it. And yeah, that was kind of what started it. So I was then helping them with both maths and English. And I was really just basing a lot of the way that I taught things around the way that I had learnt myself, like how I had self-taught things. I speak pretty publicly about having not gone to a very good school. I would say we were 7th from the bottom in Victoria out of about 540 schools. We were right down there. And a lot of my teachers either weren't qualified teachers or at least were not qualified to teach the subject they were teaching. And so a lot of my senior years were spent self-teaching out of textbooks and a lot of Google searching at home and things like that. And I didn't really realize that I was probably building very good skills to become an educator. When I first went for that job, I didn't even realize that tutoring was a job. Like, I genuinely, it was not even on my radar. I didn't even realize people did it part-time or anything. But immediately knew that I really enjoyed it. Then pretty much from that, I just had those 2 students for that year in 2011. And so there, I guess I was kind of building up the skills. Then when I got to 2012, then there were 2 more students that came on. They were again referred, and I had those 4 students continuing. And not much happened in 2012. It was kind of all the same thing. I kept doing the tutoring work week to week. What I was also doing was in 2011 and 2012, once I kind of started tutoring and I realized that I really liked it, in 2011 I went back to my high school and basically went, okay, there's no motivation for the students here that is going to make them realize how important maths is specifically. I was very passionate about the maths and the sciences particularly. And so I pretty much just walked into the front office and just said, hey, I graduated here last year in 2010 and I work as a tutor, but I'd like to volunteer and help in the classrooms of any of the senior maths and physics classes that I can help with. Physics in particular, because when I went through year 12 and even year 11, we never really had a stable teacher. And so we had a really small class and pretty much everyone struggled with it. Myself included, to kind of really get to grips with how the subject worked. And it took a lot of work. And I realized that they hadn't fixed that staffing issue when I'd left. And so I realized like physics was something I wanted to be involved in, and I wanted to help improve the actual educational quality, but also have someone in the student's corner, because I knew that there were going to be students like me that really saw value in their education but weren't able to squeeze a lot of value out of what was being provided to them. And I wanted to make sure that those students weren't falling through the cracks and were going to actually make it to university and go on to study. I went to a school where most students didn't go to university, and when they did, they were usually the first generation of their family to do so. And it was the same case in my family. I've got a number of siblings, but we were like the first generation in the family to actually go to university. And that's a really, really big metric to follow. And it's an unfortunate reality that a lot of students who do come from households where there is no university education, statistically are less likely to go on to tertiary education. There are improvements, but back then it was a little bit different. And a lot of students would be pushed into vocational training, which I've got nothing against, but a lot of students that were more than capable of moving on to tertiary education were pushed away from it, or they weren't in an environment that supported them in doing that. There are also a number of like financial burdens and things that come with being a university student that a lot of students just couldn't bear. So that was a big part of what motivated me to do that. The maths methods course, which was one of the more advanced senior maths subjects as well, that was another one that was struggling with staffing. And so I ended up volunteering in both the year 12 physics and the year 12 maths methods classes. And I would pretty much go in once or twice a week outside of my uni classes. I'd usually go straight from uni, take the train back, and then go straight to the school and then just kind of walk in, be there for their afternoon classes. I think it was on a Friday most of the time. And I would just come into the classroom as a visitor, and I would basically be a classroom tutor for free for them. And I would go around, I would help the students. Sometimes I was actually formally teaching, and at the front of the classroom, whiteboard markers and whiteboard. And that was a really good experience. And I realized I really enjoyed actually teaching people as a group and not just the one-on-one stuff. I still prefer one-on-one, but I did like the kind of animated style of teaching to a whole classroom. And it was really good. I built a really good relationship with the students, and they took a lot from it, and I got a lot of really good feedback. So I kept doing that in 2012. But then by the time 2012 came, I mentioned in some of my videos that my mum passed away in 2012. She was sick with breast cancer since 2008. And so she passed away in middle of 2012. And that was when obviously my responsibilities at home were a lot bigger. And so I really just did not have it in my weekly schedule to be able to also be volunteering on top of running a household and raising my younger siblings and things as well, and trying to earn an income to support the household. So 2012 was kind of the pivotal year where things changed quite a bit. And then 2013, I had to move away from the volunteering at the school, and there was another volunteer program that I was doing, but I'll kind of talk about that separately because that ran over a number of years. So what I did was I realized I had to work a lot more, and so I upped my numbers, and I think my student number went from 4 to about 25 in 2013. By 2013, I was in my third year of my science degree at Melbourne, and struggling quite a bit with managing all those responsibilities at that point. It was quite a juggling act. But still really loved tutoring, and that was something that I was always really passionate about, and it just felt kind of easy. There was a lot of hours in it, and truthfully back then I was working for peanuts, and I was traveling all over the place, and I did that for a long time after, and it was a lot of work, and preparing for tutorials took a lot of work. There was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I was doing, and realizing, wow, this is a lot of work, but this is a real time investment, and this is going to be quite hard to manage as something to be doing while I'm being a student. And so at that point, I was starting to already think about whether or not it was something that I could pursue, or if it was something I had to give up and get a different kind of job that was maybe less time intensive but made the same money. In 2013, that was when I was also applying to medical school then, in my third year. Got to the interview phase. I won't retell that story, but got to the interview phase and got knocked back there. And again, end of 2013, when I finished the degree, that was another point where I had to work out what I was going to do with my career. And so I kind of played around with a few different ideas. 2013 was when I had officially registered the business. Once it grew to 25 students, I was like, okay, this needs to be registered. I need to declare this and do this officially. But it was really just for the formalities of doing it, and for tax purposes and things. It's like, well, I need to declare this now as a functioning business. So I'd registered as a business, didn't have a clue about how businesses work at all. And so in 2013, I was also not only studying, but working. And then at night, I was trying to Google, how does accounting work? I didn't really do anything with marketing or anything, because it wasn't really a business that I was planning on growing. It was just, I need to make sure this business functions and that I'm reporting everything correctly. So it's more the mechanics of how a business works. And so, I had to teach myself how accounting works, how to manage the finances of it, running separate business bank accounts and things like that. Even just the legalities of actually registering it. It's relatively simple to start a business, but it felt very overwhelming when it was like my whole income depended on it, and my livelihood kind of depended on it. So I was doing that. At the end of 2013, start of 2014, that was when I had to make a decision of, do I leave university and pick up a job and just work any job? And obviously with just a science degree, there's very limited employment opportunities. And that was when I had to face the reality of maybe my career is going to take a real turn. And I wasn't really in a financial position to be able to rely on tutoring without being a student as well. And this is one of the financial burdens that I talk about, this problem with when students are on, I was on youth allowance. So when students are on youth allowance or some kind of support payments, it's really hard to come off of that if you're not walking straight into a full-time job. And so the decision really becomes about, do I continue studying, racking up further student debt for the sake of being eligible for student payments and actually gaining that financial support? And so that was really what I think drove me into further study. But at that point, I was starting to learn that I actually really enjoyed business. And I thought maybe this is where I want to go. And tutoring was not really what I wanted to do. Or at least I think I wanted to do it, but I didn't believe that it was a career. I didn't believe that there was any stability in it. It just seemed very seasonal and very risky. So I ended up going into a master's program of, professional accounting and financial analysis. So it was a double master's. It was going to be a 2-year program. I did it for 1 year and was basically learning all of the accounting that I'd already had to self-teach myself, and then realizing that I'd self-taught myself incorrectly at points as well. I didn't find a huge amount of passion in it. I found it interesting, but it was never really something that I could see myself doing daily. And especially for an employer, I could just see that it would just be mind-numbingly boring for me. The financial analysis I found pretty interesting. That was kind of like a little bit of like investment banking type stuff, some like project management and like financing projects, doing NPV analysis, if anyone knows what that is, and that kind of thing, projecting for share prices, and there's a lot of like statistics, financial statistics. I still got half the textbooks in a wardrobe somewhere, and as much as I found it like kind of intellectually stimulating, it wasn't really something that was ever gonna keep me going for a full career. And so by the end of that, I walked away from that and racked up a lot of debt in the process doing that. And then went back to Melbourne. So I was at La Trobe for that year, for that first master's degree, and then didn't finish it, withdrew from it, and then went on and did Masters of Management and Marketing. Because at that point, I was starting to think maybe it's like product marketing that I really like. Like I like the creativity of it, and finance and stuff wasn't offering creativity. And in 2014, I'd cut my student numbers back down. I went down to like 4 or 5 students. So like clearly working too much made your degree suffer in your undergrad. So focus on studies and get a degree, get into a job. And then I realized that like without tutoring, I was just pretty bored with what I was learning. There wasn't enough stimulation, and tutoring, I would later realize, really gave me that. And so then in 2015, I went on to start a Masters of Management and Marketing at Melbourne Uni in the Melbourne Business School. And I did that for 1 semester, but I didn't sit the final exams. I went past the census date, so I still racked up the debt on that one as well. And that was unfortunately full fee put onto my HECS debt because there was no CSP places available in it. So it was $19,000 a semester. And I did the first semester, and I was doing an assignment on where you could choose what product you wanted to do your assignment on. And so obviously I'm an avid motorcyclist. And so I did it on a new motorcycle released by Ducati. I was doing a full kind of like product analysis, had to write up a gigantic report on it, talk about its positioning as a product and in their marketing strategy, and analyze their marketing strategy. And then I just kind of realized that this still was mind-numbingly boring. And I just kind of went, if I can't find any interest in literally doing a project on something that I am passionate about, then I'm not passionate about this career. And that was when I had to make the decision to just go leave uni, like be done with it. So I had some students, I had a few more. I think I had about 10 or so in 2015 in the background while I was working, but it was definitely not enough to sustain a full-time income. It wasn't enough to suddenly just start, going off of student payments and everything and then moving into being fully self-sufficient. So what I had to do was, when I made the decision, I just sent an email to the student services thing and just said, I want to withdraw from the course. It was while I was writing the assignment, and it was like on the day that it was due. And it was a couple of weeks out from exams starting. And I just went, I want to withdraw. They just withdrew me instantly. I was actually surprised at how quick it was. And and then that was pretty much it. I was out. And I was like, okay. So now I've walked away from a master's degree. It was also because my debt was so high at that point, my HECS debt, that choosing to back out of that degree meant that outside of medicine, where the cap goes up, I didn't actually have enough in my HECS cap to be able to restart a new degree. So it was a very permanent decision when I made that. That was really, this is it for tertiary education, like 4.5 years, and you're not going to have much to show for it, but you're going to have to make sure that the business works if that's what you're going to go with. And that's what I knew. So at that point, I just kind of realized tutoring's always been there. It's always been the thing that I've dedicated myself to. I've never felt bored with it. I've always enjoyed it. And meanwhile, like, I was volunteering in another project that was taking up a lot of my time, but it was because I was trying to put my time into tutoring in different ways, because that was what I cared about. And so that was what kind of drove me to go, all right, I need to focus on the business and make it work. So I think I had to I roughly tripled its size in the first 3 months of being out of uni. I had to just basically get as many clients as possible. And I did that all through my existing client network and through referrals. And then from there, I think by the end of the year, I had something like about maybe 30 students or so. And then it was kind of coasting. It was doing okay. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like the turbulence had died down. It was a very, very stressful year trying to make that work, and not really knowing what I was doing. But then 2016 came around, and that was when I moved here. So then, or at the end of 2015, I moved here, and that was obviously then I had rent to pay and things as well. And that was when I took on a little bit more risk, but I started hiring as well. So I got some of my year 12 students, 3 of my year 12 students from 2015. I actually offered them jobs, and I thought maybe this is a good way to actually expand this business, is take students that I've already worked with, that I know work really hard. They know how I work. I trust them. They trust me. There's mutual respect. And so I can offer them a job and create an opportunity for people. And initially, I thought it was a way to grow the business. But then I kind of realized I didn't really want to grow the business that way, but I did want to be an employer. I found it really personally rewarding. And it was a really nice way to say thank you to, for the hard work of all of my students that really did quite well, and I could see real potential in them. And so I would offer them a job. And the business did grow off of the back of that. I think more than anything, it created a much, much greater network. And so by the time we got to the end of 2016, I had those 3 tutors working with me. And I think we had a client network of around about 70 or 80 clients or so at that point. So at that point, I was like, okay, this is now proving itself to be pretty stable, and I can probably scale this a fair bit more. And I was tutoring a lot more. I think I had something like 50 students or something in 2016. And then I basically just kept it going from there. I just kept growing it as much as possible. So 2017, I had a pretty large hiring process, and we added on another 7 tutors, and some of those were friends of existing staff. And I tried to hire really internally. I tried to hire externally, and it was just a tedious process. You'd read so many resumes, and I'm quite picky with who's going to work with me and who's going to represent the business. But I found that hiring internally like that was a much, much better process, and it cut out a lot of the getting to know people, because I already knew who they were. And I wanted to run things professionally, but in a very informal, or at least like a casual way. So that was a really interesting process to go through. So we had a team of 10 by the end of 2017. And then 2018 was probably the biggest year of the business, to be honest, in terms of how much stuff happened, because that was when I was starting to think, okay, now we can start to grow this. And I had nothing but the business in mind. I was like, okay, this is 100% where my career is going to go. And that was when I tripled the staff number in 3 months over the summer. So from the end of 2017 to the start of 2018, I believe it was, we went from 10 staff to 30 staff. and I hired a lot of existing students and a lot more friends of friends, and I think a couple were hired externally. And yeah, we went to 30 staff. Our client numbers went to, I don't even know, I think it might have been close to 150 or something. And everyone was uni students that I was hiring. And my thinking behind it wasn't even about growing the business. It was basically, once I realized how rewarding it is to hire somebody and have someone working with you and creating an income for somebody, that was something that was really important to me, because I had to work so hard to create an income for myself. And I had to work in a job before tutoring where I wasn't respected, where I got paid relatively well, but you had to really work for the money. And there were so many sacrifices in it. And so I really wanted to create a job that was walk-in, walk-out, that really shouldn't be walk-in, walk-out. And tutoring is not a walk-in, walk-out job. You have to prepare for your students. You have to think about how they're progressing. You have to be in contact with the parents. You have to be planning lessons and adapting the way that you teach them. And so I was like, I reckon I'm going to try and create tutoring. I'm going to try and turn tutoring into a walk-in, walk-out job for my staff. Like, that's going to be the reward, and it's going to be a really generous position. Like, it's going to be a really generous process of hiring, where normally people think someone gets hired because the boss is trying to exploit them for profit. And I was like, what if I can create a business model that is ultimately, there is some profit derived, but it's not the main focus, and it's a very small portion of it, and I go for volume instead. And instead I focus on retention of staff and actually make sure that they've got a job that is always more valuable than they expected, right? Or that they would want out of it. It's always a step ahead. And so the way that I did that was, one thing I did was that I would always pay above award wages, well above. At one point we were, baseline income, like baseline wages, we were paying 1.5 times the standard minimum for the industry. And that was the entry level hourly rate. On top of that, I created schemes where it was like, if a client cancels, the employee still gets their income, because that was one of the hardest things I had to face, was the variability of income, particularly when you have fewer students and you're a uni student. You can have your income cut in half because clients might be canceling, and that was something that I had to learn how to manage as a business manager. And so, being an employer, I'm like, well, I don't want to pass that risk on to my employees. So I put in place systems that would improve retention, but also where this would happen, and sometimes it does happen, the idea was the business would bear the brunt of that, and instead the employee has no changes to their income. So there was stable income in something that shouldn't be stable. And I was like, that would be great to be able to create stable income for somebody. Because that, to me, as an employee, that would be one of the most important things, especially as a student. The second thing I wanted was flexibility, and so I gave employees autonomy to be able to control their own schedules, choose when they worked, and work as much or as little as they felt they wanted to work. So there was never, at any point, pressure for them to take on clients they didn't want to take on. It was always that if there was a client available, I would let them know, and they can let me know if they wanted to take it on, or if they wanted to wait, or if they wanted to reject it. And that was how we ran the business. So most of the time we turned away more business than we accepted. I would probably say that for every client we took on, we probably turned away 6 or 7 other clients. And this was just down to the availability of staff. I was always booked out. I think by 2018, I had something like 60, 70 students that I was managing myself and teaching. And so the rest was split across the staff. And if they wanted to just work 1 hour a week, they can work 1 hour a week. If they wanted to work more, they can work more. So we did that. It worked really, really well. On top of that, we did a lot of, we tried to. It was quite difficult because everyone was all over the state, but I always made sure that I was like, if I ever had someone that was my employer, I would want to feel that they were actually caring about my position, and I guess not exploiting my time or anything like that. So whenever we would do meetings and get-togethers, we would do a lot of team building stuff. Everything, I would always make sure that there was no cost to to any of my employees. So we would go out for dinner and I would shout everybody dinner. It hurt my own pocket quite a bit when you're paying dinner for quite so many people, but I would do it because it was like, well, this is the whole point. Like, this is why you got into employing. It's about creating opportunity. It's not about creating profit. I had the assumption that like profit will arrive in one way or another, whether it's direct or indirect. And ultimately, I didn't really care that much about creating a gigantic corporation or anything. It was just like, hey, what's the point of actually running a business? It's to do things your own way. The way that I want to do things is I want to be an employer that is not necessarily squeezing profit out of people, but basically using that opportunity to create an ideal job for somebody in the short term, and then when they're ready to leave, they can leave. And that's pretty much what we've done for the last 6 years. So, I mean, business-wise, it doesn't make any sense. You're making next to nothing. So, like, to give you the breakdowns of it, like, if we charge $50 for a 1-hour tutorial for our high school students, then out of that, $30 goes towards wages or more. If they're on, there were pay scales as well. And then on top of that, then you've got, if someone were to cancel, we did have cancellation fees at a point, but I tried to be as flexible as possible. So for quite a while, like, it was absorbing those costs and paying through the wages regardless. And then you've got superannuation on top of that. Then you've got insurances, and then you've got GST and all these other things. And so it whittled down. Like, by the end of it, it was like $6 to $8 per shoot that was coming away for profit to the business. It was absolutely minuscule. But I didn't really care because I was like, well, profit is profit. So, hey, that's great. But more importantly, it's like, you know, you've created a stable income for somebody. That's way more important than anything else. Ultimately, I was like, I'm working for myself in terms of my own students. I don't really need to have employees making money for me. They should be making money for themselves. That's kind of the idea. In terms of like the walk-in, walk-out stuff, pretty much they would be able to consult me for lesson planning, or I would do the lesson planning with them or for them. I would adjust with their schedules around uni schedules. That was something that I always got really frustrated with working for a company, was that it's very hard for them to respect assignment time and the variability of a university schedule. And so for me, it's as flexible as possible. If there are exams on, we schedule around that. We make sure we work with the client and we work it out. And there's always a way to find a way to fix things. That worked relatively well. I wouldn't lie in saying that it wasn't a headache. It's an absolute nightmare to be constantly scheduling and rescheduling, but it's what I signed up to do. And so, yeah, with that, we had 30 staff. Once we hit 2018, though, I got really exhausted and really stressed out because there was a lot of financial risk in that model. And I had to work out whether or not it was sustainable, whether or not it was good for me personally, like not financially, but more so, am I going to be able to keep up with this kind of a workload without a whole lot of reward? But even in terms of the reward, it was just the workload was huge. When you're managing that many calendars and that many clients, I realized that I was just spending hours and hours putting out spot fires and dealing with problems and just on the phone and through emails and chasing up payments and all of this kind of the stuff that you don't get paid for and the stuff that is not always the most riveting parts of running a business. And at that point, it was like, okay, I don't think I really want to grow this any further. I did have plans to keep exponentially growing it. And then I was like, you need to stop here for a moment and think about whether or not this is sustainable, and what's actually involved in getting it to the next level. And it means bringing in more people, probably then having managers, and starting to delegate. And I was like, this is getting more chaotic and more risky, and the risk is not there with the reward. So it kind of hit its stopping point. And so that was when I stopped hiring. And then slowly, as people finished up their university studies, they would leave the business because it was a university degree it was a uni job for them. And so that was when I started to descale the business, and I wanted to simplify it and go back to just ultimately just having a small team or just it being me. And so between 2018 and 2022, that has slowly whittled down to the point we've literally only got one active tutor working at the moment. and it's a lot more manageable. I'm glad that I had the experience of being a manager, and I learnt a lot from it, and I found it really rewarding. But I ultimately learnt that it's not really something that I'd want to do all the time. I think it was just something that I wanted to do in the short term, and I'm glad that I did it because I got to create like a really different type of job for people, and something that people actually cared about. Like it's so different when you've got employees who actually care about the person who started it or the person who's kind of orchestrating it, and people who actually care about what you're trying to do and respect the work that you're doing, as opposed to just mindlessly doing the job because they're told to do it. That was really, really cool to see. I don't think that I'm the best manager either. I think I learnt a lot about my weaknesses as a manager, but it's ultimately just a position that I don't enjoy, because to be successful in it, you do have to exploit in some way. It sounds terrible, but like you have to think about how to best use someone's resources or someone's abilities, and that to me is just not something that I can train myself to do a whole lot. I'd much prefer to leave that to somebody who's better suited to it and kind of fits into their personality. For me, it was always something that was a bit alien, and something that I had to consciously try to do and never felt comfortable with doing it either. So it kind of got to a point where my management style and my ideals kind of hit their limit in terms of continuing on a successful business. So, and it was also, just a crazy amount of work. So that was kind of the crescendo almost of the business. And then it slowly just kind of slowed down. It's truthfully, it's not as big as it used to be. I think it still operates at pretty much the same level with less people. And I think a lot of that is because I've tried to focus it more on helping it create revenue that doesn't rely on investment of time all the time, even though the primary business of it is a service, and running a service business is, if anyone watching this has run a service business, they are hard, and compared to a product business where you can multiply profits on your investment, and you can create a multiple on really good sales, as much as sales is difficult. With a service, you've got really high running costs when you've got employees on it and you've got wages to pay, and you're trading every hour worked for profit. So every bit of revenue that comes in has some outgoings attached to it. So that's a really hard thing to actually manage and generate profit from. And so realistically, the profit margins dropped pretty significantly as soon as I started employing, but ultimately profit level still would go up, but not at the same level as people would expect, because most of that profit was drawn out by the policies that I had in place. And again, that was an intentional thing. It was not really about growing profit, but more so creating as many jobs for young people as possible. So I think overall, I haven't actually stacked it all up. I think it's something like, in those 6 years, I think it's somewhere in the order of about $150,000 to $200,000 of income has been created for young kind of early 20s employees, which to me is amazing. Like that's such a huge contribution. It's nothing in the ocean of employment, but as a small business, as an individual, I'm really proud to say that I've created that much benefit for young people. And done it in what I think is a very ethical way. When the pandemic hit, like one of the things that I did pretty soon after, during 2020, was introduced voluntary sick leave, because all of my staff are paid on a casual basis, and that is because their schedules do change, and so they also take advantage of the scheduled or the 25% loading. And that was another thing in the way that I kind of created it, was it was effectively creating a part-time job with complete stability, but with all of the perks of both part-time and casual. So they get 25% loading, but then as well as that, get hours that they can choose as well without having a changing roster on them. They can change their roster effectively. And then on top of that, I would also do, you still get paid when you can't work kind of thing, which is not necessarily what happens with casual jobs. So if the client cancels, they get paid out. And so it was really trying to get the best of both worlds, and get around the drawbacks to any one of those positions. The other thing then was bringing in voluntary sick leave. So watching what was happening and seeing how many casualised staff were facing that problem of having to choose between going to work or getting tested for COVID and that kind of thing. And I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy that people are having to make a choice between their income and putting food on the table and their health as well, and the health of others. And so it stemmed from that, but it was a broader thing, and it was always something that I wanted to always be someone who was doing things differently in employment. And so pretty soon, I can't remember exactly when it was, I made a Facebook post on our business page, so I'll pull that up if I can find it. But I introduced that voluntarily, where all of our staff then had entitlements to, they could accrue sick leave as they worked, so that if they were sick, they could use that and actually take time off as well. And that was huge. It was never going to be overly beneficial to the business, but it was something that I could afford to do, and it was something that I wanted to do. I was like, hey, I can walk away from being an employer knowing that I did something different and had an impact in some way. And I said when I did that, I was like, this will change, like this will come about. And now we're seeing the legislation change, but I wanted to be ahead of the legislation. I didn't want to be someone dragged into it. I wanted to be an employer that was leading the charge. And so that was one of the things that we did. We also kept flexible work, so tutors could stay working online permanently if they didn't feel comfortable traveling again, or if it wasn't cost effective for them to travel. And we worked through that, and we kept a lot of online students. But yeah, and so now we're at a point where there's only one staff member, and I kind of plan to effectively just kind of descale the business right down to nothing. Next year it'll probably just be me. I don't know if the other tutor wants to still continue. They might still want to, and if that's the case, then we keep continuing. But it's not really something that I plan on growing now that I'm pursuing medicine. It's just not something that I can keep up. And so it'll kind of recede into a smaller part of my life from next year. But so it's kind of weird to be closing the door on it now, somewhat half closing the door. But that's kind of where I'm at with that. In terms of tutoring, I think tutoring will always be a part of what I do. The nice thing about medicine is that there's a huge amount of academia and education involved in it, and I would love to be involved in education further down the line with it, because it's something that I think I'll always be passionate about. And I say it's equal, like my passion for healthcare and medicine is equal to my passion for education. And I know that because I've dedicated a lot of my time to it. So talking about like volunteering, when I was in, what was it, 2012? Yeah, it was 2012 when I started volunteering for an outreach program with the Melbourne University Health Initiative, which is a charity run through student groups at Melbourne University. And they were just taking over the program, which used to be run by the Medical Student Society, and that was running revision lectures for year 12s from underrepresented backgrounds. And so this would be students who had refugee status, non-English speaking backgrounds, underrepresented schools, financial disadvantage. Anyone who was eligible for the special entry scheme effectively would be eligible for this program. And it was put on, and I think it ran with ticket prices like $5 or something like that, because everything else, lectures were really popular back then, and they would charge $50, $100, $200. And no one could afford it if they were from a low SES background or a disadvantaged background. And so it was entirely volunteer run. We ran on a really, really strict budget. And in 2012, I joined as the biology subject manager. So I managed that subject, led a team of about 10 tutors, and wrote the material, and then gave lectures and lectured the entire VCE course for units 3 and 4 biology. Really, really enjoyed that experience, and then came back in 2013. Basically I think I had the exact same role in 2013, and I also volunteered in another very similar program in a summer school running the bio team. And then after 2013, then came back to the student welfare team, and went again in 2014. And at that point I wasn't even studying at Melbourne, so I was at La Trobe, so I was having to drive across Melbourne like to the campus. And I think I was bio manager again that year, and we ran tutorials and everything else as well. And then in 2015, I took on way more responsibility. So what did I do? So I ended up I moved out of the biology manager role, and because in 2014 I was co-lecturing with Travis, who, if you watch the first episode of this podcast, that was who I spoke with. That was the program that we were volunteering in, and we were co-lecturing in 2014. And then he took over as the bio manager and lecturer in 2015, and I moved to run a new pilot project, which was a masterclass project where we would send a team of tutors out to different partnered schools that were underrepresented, and actually run revision workshops once every term throughout the year to help them prepare for their SACs and for the exams across 8 different subjects. So I got the role as leading that project in its first year, and I was very ambitious in it, in running 8 subjects, and everyone told me don't run 8 subjects, and I was like, I'm going to run 8 subjects, we're going to get them all going. And in that we partnered with 4 schools, 2 of them were joint, and they were all over the place. We partnered with Collingwood and Fitzroy, they're the joint school. We partnered with Essendon Keilor College in Essendon, and then also with what they call Western Heights College out in Geelong as well. And so we would drive out to the schools, or at least I would go all the way out to the schools, and I would meet with the VCE departments and discuss the program with them, and then be in constant, I would liaise with them, we would set up the programs, and then we had to interview and hire the team of volunteer tutors that would actually run these subjects, and then train them on exactly how to do it, and then send them out there. And sometimes I would be out there, it would be after school, so sometimes I would have to actually skip work and go to actually supervise and check and get feedback. And we did this throughout the year. And so we grew it to 4 schools, and I think 250 students by the end of it were participating in it. We had 500% growth from the first term to the third term. And it was the fastest growing project out of the entire charity. And we had a budget of $500. That had to cover our printing, it had to cover everything, and I had to fight for more funding, and we just couldn't get a bigger budget. And so it was really, really tight. So that I was doing that, I was probably putting in 30 hours a week into that volunteer role. And I was also kind of still getting involved in the bio team. I was still volunteering as a tutor on the day for the revision lecture program. And I was also involved with the other project that they were running, which was the virtual program, which we partnered with Bendigo Senior Secondary College. We went out there, and then we had the students involved in a virtual online tutoring program. This was in 2015, so well before the pandemic. And we got that off the ground, and that was a really interesting experience. And then not long into 2015, I actually ended up taking over the role of running the entire program, which was overseeing all 3 of those projects. And so I had lots of different roles, so I was stretched pretty thin, and I was probably putting in 45 hours a week into all of that. And I probably spent about 10 hours a week just in meetings with different people. And all this was at Melbourne Uni, so at that point I'd left uni by May of that year, and I was working full-time trying to build the business, but I was also dedicating a good 45 hours a week into these projects. And then they also, in 2015, we had the Melbourne University Education Department running the training program, and the feedback was that it wasn't very helpful. And so then they decided to get me to do their training program, and I basically redid the training program and ran it for all of their projects, and trained, I think there was 150 tutors, and I ran big lectures and workshops with 150 tutors, and taught them all exactly how they should tutor, how to go about it. So yeah, that was a very interesting experience, and I learned a lot from that. And then in 2016, I had to start to step away from those roles a little bit, focusing on my business a bit more, and instead I came back just as the tutor trainer for their projects, and effectively it was like consulting for them. And so overall it was like a 5-year span of being involved in that one. And I think all of those projects still run today, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, so that was when I kind of realized, once I kind of hit 2015, 2016, that was when I realized that I was putting in more time into tutoring and volunteer tutoring than I was into studying. And that was when I knew, like, okay, this needs to be my career. And so that's pretty much everything in terms of like tutoring specifically. And then Gamsat tutoring, right? I don't really talk much about that, but like I initially started off as a maths and English tutor, but wanted to be tutoring sciences. As I got more students, started tutoring sciences, which was really rewarding. And then by about 2014, I was tutoring uni students in like statistics, in biochemistry, in anatomy and physiology, and just, general chemistry as well, lots of different things. Just kind of kept expanding what I could teach as I went. I realized that my skills were pretty transferable, and was able to cover lots of different things because I studied a lot of different topics. Even in my science degree, I did a breadth sequence in macroeconomics and business law. And that was, like, if you've read my Thursday thoughts, that's why I was so invested in talking about the energy crisis at the moment. I found that really interesting. So I was able to actually put those subjects to use for once. And that was when I found like that I was tutoring most subjects. So like now with VCE, I tutor like most of the subjects that are on offer. And I always try to learn more so that I can continue to teach more subjects. Because it's just something, I just find the process of learning, processing, comprehending, and then mastering to the point of teaching is a really interesting process. And it's something that as you get more comfortable with teaching, you start to learn how to learn better, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's kind of why, I think that's a big part of why the business has been so successful, is because I haven't been limited to specific year levels or subjects. Like I've worked with students as young as 5 years old, all the way through to mature age university students in their 50s and things like that. And I've always found every part of it really, really interesting. And so now moving into doing Gamsat tutoring as well, it was something that I was doing in the background here and there, but never really did officially. And that's been probably the most rewarding change that I've made in tutoring, where I'm not tutoring quite as many high school students as I used to, and now tutoring a lot more Gamsat candidates. I haven't really totaled it up. I think it's going to be close to 150 students just in 2022 that I've helped prepare for their sittings. And it's a really different experience to work with people that are a little bit further along in their education, where there's a real function to what we're preparing for. It's very tangible, and it's also just a much more stimulating kind of type of content to be working with, because it's trying to teach people. It sounds really wrong to say how to think, but it is kind of like a way to think, a way to process, and I find that very, very intricate. And I like the process of working out what's the best way to teach someone. And that's, I think, what's always drawn me to tutoring. And people always say, why don't you become a classroom teacher? All my students, all my high school students, they all say, you should be a high school teacher. You should be a maths teacher. And I just tell them I have no interest in that, because I'm not interested in a one-size-fits-all teaching for the masses. I much prefer individualized teaching, where I have to learn about the student and I have to work out how do they process information? What are the things that they make errors on? How do they think? What motivates them? All these kind of things. And then you can kind of work around that. It keeps you agile, because if you keep doing the same thing, it does get boring. There's plenty of shoots that I do with my VCE students where I know what I'm going to say, because I've said it hundreds of times before. And so some of those are a little bit boring, to be honest. Students keep things interesting, but the actual process of having to go through teaching content that you know is not changing is sometimes not the most exciting. But if you're able to engage the student, that keeps things exciting, and being able to change the way you do it for different students. If I've got a student who really loves basketball and plays on a basketball team and everything, then I'm going to bring in basketball as much as I can in the way that I explain things and use analogies. And I like the challenge of that. It's like a puzzle. And yeah, when you make that connection for somebody and they realize like, oh, like this is making sense now, and like there's a way to think about this that makes sense to me, and this person's going to help me see that. That to me is like, that's the most important part of the whole thing. That's the most rewarding part of it. But yeah, I mean, I'm just rambling now, but that's pretty much kind of where I'm at. And so with Gamsat tutoring is just on another level of rewarding and just interesting. And it's really interesting to be able to work with people from other countries now as well. That was something that kind of started happening without me even realizing it was happening, was that now I've got students that are in the UK and in they're in Ireland, they're in England, students from New Zealand, students from all over the place, even just all around Australia. And there's something that's really interesting about making that same connection with somebody who probably has a very, very different life experience to you, and still being able to make that connection is really, really interesting and really, really rewarding. Apart from that, though, I mean, don't really know what else to say. I mean, in terms of like why I'm choosing to pursue medicine now, like it's something that I think I always wanted to do, but once I didn't get in, I just told myself like, that's it. Don't keep wishing after it, because you'll hate yourself for it. You'll kick yourself for it. And I knew that. So I had to get pretty realistic about what excited me. And I think a lot of people misinterpret it as, or at least people around me, I think some people have misinterpreted it when I tell them like, I think I'm going to go back to uni and try to become a doctor. Then they think that it's like, oh, it's because tutoring's not really a thing. Like, you don't care about that. This has just always been in the way. And it's really not that at all. Like, I'm actually going to be really sad to say goodbye to tutoring. I'm still going to hold on to it while I'm at medical school. But whether or not I actually keep doing it after that, I would like to, but I just don't think it's realistic. It's more so an equal passion, and it's one of those things where I've always known that going back to university is a really difficult financial decision. And I've never been in a position of financial privilege in my life. And so having worked quite so hard to be able to be now in a position where I could, not comfortably, but could go back to being a student and pursuing that again and giving it a go, it just seems like it's an opportunity I should take. In terms of like why it's medicine, this is like getting into like a medical school interview preparation now, I guess. This is probably good practice. But I think the thing for me is that I reflected on like, why did I choose tutoring? Why did that pop out to me? And a lot of it was kind of serendipitous in a way in the beginning, and then I kind of fell backwards into it and learnt that I really enjoyed it. Whereas medicine's a little bit different. And so I thought a little bit more about why it is that why education is so important to me. And I think one is because I learnt the importance of education through financial hardship, and I learnt that like education is the way out. It's always the way out. And the second thing is that health is equally important, but I didn't realize that until, truthfully, just a couple of years ago. I really didn't I took my health for granted, and didn't really realize just how important it is, and also how significant health outcomes can be for people from different economic backgrounds. And so a lot of that drives it. And so I started to realize that like someone's health and someone's education are probably the two most important factors in determining outcomes for that individual, both in their academic endeavors, in their professional life and their career prospects, in their health and well-being and their happiness, in their relationships. There's so many different things. And I've always been really privileged to be able to be involved in the educational careers of my students, and sometimes being involved in them for a really long time. I've got one student who I started tutoring when he was 8 years old in grade 2, and then he truthfully could not speak English, he couldn't read, and mostly couldn't write either. And now he's in year 10 at the moment, and is performing really, really well, and he's doing a health subject that's a year ahead. He's doing a year 11 subject in year 10 and doing really, really well. And we had to work around all kinds of things. Like he had attention issues, and seeing the change that education and intervention in education can have on an individual is so profound. And I think that's just one example, but all of my students, I see the impact that I can have as an educator and as someone who inspires them in their education, and will hopefully have them go on to pursue their own kind of path in that, and maybe even go on to kind of take on some kind of similar leadership role. But you can never be involved in the health of that student. You can, in a way, in their mental health, in terms of supporting them and encouraging them and motivating them, but there's a limit to how much you can do. And particularly being a business owner, it's always been kind of frustrating that you're limited by the need to derive profit. You can't make a living without an income. And so when your income is tied to that, it becomes very frustrating that you're not able to exercise the ideals. And so for me, it's like health is like, it seems like the next natural progression, in that I feel I've exhausted everything that I can do with education. I will still keep the YouTube channel, obviously. Don't worry about that. But in terms of being a tutor, I think I've had my impact. And at this point now, it's like I need to level it up in a sense and have a broader impact. And so one of the things about being a doctor is that you can have that direct impact on individuals, and on something as important as their health. And there's advocacy and education that comes with that, which I really like and I'm really excited about. But as well as that, it's something where, because of our healthcare system, you're not necessarily charging the patient. So like instead it's the healthcare system that is paying rather than the individual. So if someone is in a position where they can't afford like tutoring, they literally just can't afford tutoring. And outside of my own charity, I can't do much for them, right? There's only so much that you can do. And that's a big part of why I did the channel, because it's like, well, it had greater impact, and it was like, this is a way that I can do something without having to ask for money, because I've already got an income and I've already got a job that is stable. So now I need to use my experience and my skills to be able to start offering something that does not ask for money and that no one is priced out of, and that has significant impact. And that's the same thing with being a healthcare professional of any kind, is that you're able to have direct impact and you don't have to be asking the receiver for money. It can be bulk billed, it can be covered by health insurance. So to me, it just seemed like a much better system as an individual, where it's not this direct reciprocity of pay me for my service kind of thing, pay me for my help. I don't like that. So that's a big one. That's a really, really big one as to like, does it meet with my philosophy of service? And it probably matches with my philosophy of service more than my current job actually does. The second part of it is that I realized that for me growing up, like I didn't have a really strong connection with healthcare. I never really went to a GP, never went to the hospital, never didn't even really have medicines in the house or anything. And I don't really know what, maybe there's a lot of other reasons, but I know for sure that it was like health seemed like something it seemed like a privilege rather than a right in my mind. That's kind of how I kind of interpret it growing up. And I think growing up in a poor household, you focus on what is a necessity and what is immediately most important. And immediately most important is making sure that there is food on the table and that there is money coming in the door. And so that's kind of how I've approached adulthood, that like cash is king. It's always just like income is always the priority, and you sacrifice everything else for that because income's the most important thing. But it's only because income was scarce. But then I've started to realize, one, the value of having a really strong connection with healthcare is so important. And I kind of look back and I'm like, I wish I had a stronger connection with a family GP or with anything, just like counselling services, all that kind of stuff. None of that was really available. At least it wasn't made available to me. So why I'm so drawn to pediatrics is because I don't really know where it goes and if I even follow that path. But I'm pretty sure that working with children is really what I want to do, because one, it ties in perfectly with what I've dedicated my life to for the last 12 years. But the other big thing is that's how I can start to have an impact, because if I had any connection with healthcare where I enjoyed the experience and that it was a really positive experience as a young person, then I'm more inclined to continue to engage healthcare. So for me, that's probably what I want to do with it, is be the doctor that actually has that impact and improves the relationship between patient and healthcare, not just patient and doctor, but patient and healthcare, and keeps them engaged in the healthcare system, because I know that will lead to better outcomes for that individual. And if that happens on a broader scale, then we've got better health. That's really the main thing. Obviously, I talk about in some of my other episodes, some of my podcasting conversations with people, that I know my skills align a lot more with that, because I'm very comfortable working with young people. I feel that I understand them very well. I can relate with them very well, despite the fact that sometimes some of my students will make fun of me because I don't know what the latest slang is and what it means. And I'm happy to play grandpa with them, and they can school me on it. But ultimately, I think that I have good rapport with young people, and I think that would translate well to healthcare practice as well. In terms of why it's like being a doctor and not being a nurse or being an allied health professional or anything, is one, I think the diversity of responsibility in being a doctor is huge for me. I'm not someone who can just have limited scope. I like broad scope and probably unbounded scope in some ways, which is why I started a business. And I think medicine, practicing as a doctor, is probably best able to do that. Even if you eventually fall into some specialty or something, I think that the other healthcare roles are somewhat more limited in scope, which would not be personally motivating. And if I'm not personally motivated in my job, particularly in a job in healthcare, then I shouldn't be in it. I've always had that opinion. And it's kind of the same thing that I do with tutoring. It's like, as soon as I don't like tutoring, I should stop being a tutor, because you're actually causing harm potentially. And it's a responsibility to walk away and find something else. So for me, I think it comes down to personal motivations and what it is that excites me. And the other thing is, I mentioned in my specialty quiz video thing, is that I like decision making. I've always loved decision making. And I love that about business, because you have to make decisions every day. You have to be creative, and you have to problem solve, and medicine offers those things. So those are really the big reasons why. A lot of people would assume that it would have something to do with my mum passing away. There's an element of that. I did write about that in my personal statement, for example. I won't go into detail, but it was definitely eye-opening, that experience, and that probably taught me a lot more about how disconnected I was from healthcare when I was thrust into the hospital situation, and watching that process unfold. But there wasn't actually as much personal motivation that came from that. And it was funny, because oncology came up as my most suited specialty, and it makes a lot of sense based on the answers that I gave. But it came as a bit of a surprise, and I don't really have that whole thing of like, oh, my mom passed away from cancer, therefore I want to fight for, cancer patients, and I want to help them. I think I don't really have, outside of like the health of children, I don't really have a specific cohort or patient population that I'm specifically passionate about. I think just young people, and that's just because that's what I know very well, because that's who I've worked with for a really long time. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the main motivations behind it. And if it didn't work out, it's always one of those things where it's like, I'm not under any pressure, because if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I would keep doing what I'm doing very, very happily. And I would be able to know with great relief that I did not have to do another 4 years of uni. That is in many ways still daunting. As exciting as it is, it's also very daunting. And there's a lot of risk involved in terms of, have I budgeted correctly? Am I going to be able to support myself through these 4 years? Is it going to be mentally and emotionally and physically grueling? These are all things that I still don't really know, but I figure that I will face them when they come, if they come. The other thing that's kind of funny is I kind of think that if I were to get into medical school, I probably will end up working less intensely than I currently do. I've spent the last 12 years working a pretty crazy schedule by most standards. It's not really something that has ever bothered me, because I've always been doing it out of choice, and I always will fill time with things that I care about doing, and a lot of that is work related, but it's not work in that it's work because I have to do it. It's always by choice. And so I spent the better part of the last 12 years working 100 to 120 hours a week, and sleeping for 4 to 5 hours a night kind of thing. And it worked really, really well during my 20s. But now that I'm approaching 30, physically, your body can't keep doing that. And that's probably the only limitation to it. But am I still as motivated to work as tenaciously? Yes. And I get frustrated sometimes when I get tired because I go, damn it, I have to call it a day and I can't get as much done as I wanted to do. That being said, it's like I take time out now. I have to make sure that I do, because it's just part and parcel of it. And I'm going to have to train myself to do that next year. And so I'm preparing myself to do that now. Apart from that, I think if people looked at my work schedule, they'd probably still say that's a lot. I don't really know. I don't really count the hours anymore. I used to, because I just thought it was kind of funny and kind of cool. But now I don't really count the hours. But yeah, most days are kind of 8 in the morning until midnight, 1 in the morning is a pretty standard work day, maybe with an hour and a half of downtime during that period, for lunch or for taking this one out for a walk or something. But otherwise, it's a pretty consistent work schedule. But I've always enjoyed it. I've always liked that, and I would hope that whatever happens next year, it's still all happening by choice, and I'll be as motivated in that. But I'll probably end up taking a fair bit more time out, because I think it's going to be something to adjust to. I'm used to what I do right now because I've been doing it for so long, so it probably doesn't take quite as much effort to do it, but adjusting to a new environment and a new work schedule and different tasks, and just being a student is probably going to be something that takes a bit of adjusting to, for sure. But anyway, that's pretty much it. That's what's kind of led me to this point. If you've been following along, the channel's been around for about a year now. Almost. August 10th is going to be its 1 year. A lot of videos have been made, and I hope to make many, many more. But I hope if you got to the end of this is so much longer than I expected it to be. I was thinking this is going to be like a half-hour video. This is going to be like an hour and a half, I think, if my camera's right. So if you've listened to this entire thing, I don't even know if thank you suffices for it, to be honest. It might just be playing in the background. I don't know how many people will be watching this on YouTube, but if you've got it playing in Spotify, that's cool. Hopefully you've taken something useful from it, some kind of insight. If not, then you now know exactly what I've been doing for the last 12 years, and just about every single thought that's gone through my head in the last 12 years, because I've just about blurted the whole thing out here. But anyway, I'll leave this one there. Don't really know what to do for an outro, but I'll just see you guys in the next one. Hopefully we'll have a really good guest lined up for 2 weeks' time. All right, I'll see you guys later.